Good morning, folks. So first we're going to do is a quick review of the ingredients. What I have is a half a cup of chopped walnuts and a half a cup of craisins. We're going to cover those with some cold water and let them soak just until we're ready to do our first set of stretch and folds. That time we'll drain the water and add them into the dough. Next we're going to need 450 grams of flour. Now I have it broken down with 375 grams of strong white bread flour and 75 grams of organic rye flour. And to that, what we're going to need to do is add 8 grams of kosher salt, and we can go ahead and add that into the flour at this point. And then we're going to need to take 310 milliliters of room temperature water, and to the water we're going to add 100 grams of starter. And here we're adding I'm adding a white bread flour starter, again 100 grams, and we're going to give that a kind of a gentle stir. And what we're trying to do is just get the starter broken up into the water. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to break it up so that it's a little bit spread throughout that water. And again, just give it a quick stir, and then we can dump the flour into our mixing bowl. And at this point we can add the water and the starter. What I like to do is at first use the spoon to just kind of get the general mix done, and then switch to a rubber or a plastic bench scraper, and we're just going to continue mixing the dough for a couple minutes until you get it to like a shaggy and tacky dough. And at that point what we'll do is we're going to cover it with a towel and let it rest for 30 minutes. Okay, so after the 30 minutes have gone by, we're going to go ahead and wet down the work surface. I use a spray bottle, and then we're going to remove the dough with the bench scraper, and it'll still be a little bit tacky, so want to make sure you wet your hands well. And then just kind of flatten the dough out a little bit and do a couple of stretch and folds. And again, if it's too tacky, just wet your hands. Don't use flour at this point. So we're just going to get the dough. We're going to go through a couple of these stretch and folds. And now what we're going to do, we've drained all the water off the cranberries and walnuts, and we're just going to start introducing them into the dough. And what I do is I just press them in and kind of roll the dough over, and then try and perform a couple of these stretch and folds. Now you'll see where the cranberries and walnuts will start to kind of pop out or break the bread a little, or the dough a little bit, but that's okay. At this phase it's okay because we've got a long time in terms of the dough getting built. So again, just wetting the hand a little more, do a couple stretch and folds, and we're going to get it to a point to where it's not going to accept all the walnuts and craisins, but you just got to try and work them in there. They'll try and escape. Just keep rolling it into a ball. Once you've got it to where you think there's no more can fit in there, go ahead and just ball it up a little bit, and we're going to return that to the bowl, and there it will sit for 2 hours. We're going to let this rest covered with the towel for 2 hours. So it's been 2 hours. We're going to remove the towel. The dough's been resting at room temperature, and we're going to wet the work surface down with some water. I use a spray bottle, and with our bench scraper we'll just remove the dough to the work surface, and you can see the dough is still a little bit tacky, so you want to make sure that you wet your hands good. Don't use flour at this phase. And again, with wet hands, we're just going to perform some stretch and folds. Now we're going to do this for about a minute. Now, we don't have to go too crazy with it, but we do want to make sure that we're helping the bread develop its gluten at this phase. And and also, by doing these stretch and folds, you get the walnuts and craisins mixed. So after about a minute, go ahead and form it into a ball, and then we're going to transfer it into a clean bowl. And we're going to cover that, and we're going to let it rest for 2 more hours at room temperature. All right, so after 2 hours, you can see the dough has proofed a little bit. It's nice and firm, looking good. So we're going to go ahead and wet the work surface. Again, no flour at this phase. And wet your hands because the dough will still be a little bit tacky. And then also wet the bench scraper. But we're going to be gentle when we get the dough out of the bowl, because the dough has developed a little bit of air and gases in there, and we don't want to ruin that too much. So go ahead and give it with wet hands. I'm going to give it some stretch and folds, and we're going to continue to do the stretch and folds in this case for about 30 to 40 seconds. Nothing crazy, because you can see that the dough is already starting to develop some good strength, and the texture is really where you want it to be at this point. So we're just going to do a couple more stretch and folds, and at that point now we can kind of ball it up using that technique with you pushing the hand under. Return it to the bowl. Go ahead and give it a spritz with some water. We'll cover it with a towel, and we're going to come back in 1 hour to do the pre-shape at that point. All right, so we've had our 1 hour of rest after the last set of stretch and folds, and now you can really start to see the dough has developed nicely. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sprinkle a little bit of dough on the top, because we're going to be doing the pre-shape here. Now we do want to be careful, again, not to tear the dough. So using a bench scraper, we want to be real careful and go ahead and remove the dough from the bowl onto a floured surface. Again, flipping the dough upside down. So it's important to keep the orientation of the dough at this phase of the game. So with the bench scraper, I'm just shoving some flour up under the edges, just again to reduce the chances of tearing. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on my fingers, and all we're going to do is just grab a edge of the dough, kind of pull it out and over into the middle. And as you'll notice, the dough surface here is sticky. Underneath, of course, it's dry, but what we're trying to do is to pull the dough into the middle, and we're going to be creating some surface tension on the top of the dough by doing so. So again, just kind of repeat this, and with your fingers you're going to kind of pinch the dough together. That helps seal it and keeps it from wanting to go back to where it was. And now with the bench scraper, going to flip it over, give it a very gentle kind of roll, putting it back into a ball shape. And in our bowl, we're going to dust it well with some flour. And again, take the bench scraper, pick it up, and place it in the bowl, and it's going to rest for 1 more hour covered with the towel. And at that point, we'll be ready to do the final shaping. So after an hour, we did the pre-shape, and it's been 1 hour. So now the dough really looks good, and we're going to kind of do a very similar process that we did earlier. I'm going to sprinkle the top of the dough with a little bit of flour, again, so that it doesn't stick to the work surface. We're going to remove the dough from the bowl onto a floured work surface. And again, we want to be really careful with the bench scraper and keep the orientation of the dough so that the top is now on the floured work surface, and here is the bottom. And just like before, we're going to grab an edge, bring it in, and we're going to pinch the dough to try and keep keep that shape. So when you bring a piece of dough in, give it a good pinch. Some people like to do a stitching method, whatever. I really personally don't believe it makes a whole lot of difference. The goal here is that you're creating some tension so that you're stretching the dough over to itself, and you're creating some surface tension on the top. And again, just make sure you pinched it well and you get a good seal. Then you're going to flip it over, again, very gently. Do some rolls to get it into that ball shape. Cover it liberally with some flour so that it's not going to stick in your banneton. And once you've got it well floured, you've also floured your banneton very well. Go ahead and use your bench scraper, pick it up, and again flip it upside down so that the top is down into the banneton and the seams that you were creating are on the top here. That's really important. Now the bannetons are just a proofing basket. You can buy them on Amazon or anywhere else, but they are a very helpful tool. Now this is going to go into the refrigerator and it's going to sit overnight. So our bread's been in the refrigerator now for about 18 hours. We've removed it. For about an hour we've had it at room temperature while the oven is preheating to 475 degrees. We're going to gently, with our fingers, remove the dough, again just kind of tugging on the edges from the banneton. Let gravity do most of the work. Once you get it started, it should kind of come out well, especially if you've floured the banneton good. Place it on some parchment paper and give it a score. This is just a very simple cut from one edge to the other. You could use a serrated knife. I'm using a razor there. Now I preheated my oven and my Dutch oven to 475 degrees for about an hour while the dough was out getting to room temperature. I'm going to take the dough and now I'm placing it into the Dutch oven, and I'll return the Dutch oven back into my oven, close the door, and it's going to cook at 475 degrees for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to turn the oven down to 350 degrees and cook it for 22 minutes. Okay, so taking the bread out of the oven, and as you can see, it's very hot. But you can see it's got a nice color and a good spring to it as well. I think it really came out a very nice loaf of bread, especially given that the starter is, like I said earlier, about 8 days old, I think. Some people like their bread a little darker. I prefer it like this. I do real quick want to talk briefly about the Dutch oven. I think cooking in a Dutch oven is critical. It allows the dough to release steam, and that steam inside the Dutch oven will help your crust set up appropriately, and it allows your bread to have the appropriate amount of spring. You can cook it on a pizza steel or a stone, but you would need to introduce steam into the oven. That's why I think getting yourself a good quality Dutch oven will make all the difference in the world. So I like to place the bread on a wire rack and just let it rest, let it cool for I would say a minimum of 2 or 3 hours, depending on the temperature of your house. But you want to let the bread completely cool before you go cutting into it. You got to resist that temptation. But you can see this bread turned out nice when the time was right and we went ahead and cut into the crumb. You can see that it had a really good crumb, and the walnuts and craisins were distributed pretty well throughout the bread. Now this bread had a great aroma as well, especially nice considering the starter was, I don't know, 8 days old. So you can see some people like a more open crumb with large holes like you'd see on Instagram or whatever, but my wife likes to put butter and jam on the bread, and so this is perfect if that's the style of crumb you like. So we'll wrap up the video here by saying it is something I hope you try. It's not as difficult as some people may tell you. I'll post the ingredients at the end of this video, and you'll see it's a fairly simple and straightforward process, and I do hope you try it, and you can make some to give to your friends and family. So from our ranch to yours, have a great day.